Okay.
I'm Lindsay Sparks.
I'm Allison Lansadell.
I'm Alita Warden.
And I'm Amy Blaylock.
All right, so I'm going to facilitate this evening. And the first question, we're talking about the roles of women and mothers. The first question is, which of the readings do you side with more and why? And we're talking about mothers who know, and I think the other one was women who know. Yeah, women who know.
What women know?
Oh, sorry. No, women who know. No? What
Mothers who know and
You're
what
right.
women know.
Sorry. Okay, what women know or think they do?
I side more with Sister Bex because towards like the end, they're being like kind of harsh of talking about the stripping warriors like mothers. Like they taught them to go in there and fight and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, no, that's not what they did. They taught them to never doubt in God and always have faith that He will deliver them from evil or anything like that. So that it's kind of like, I guess, not bashing it, but it was a little harsh. That they're just teaching them to fight and kill.
I agree with you, Allison. I think that there was a lot of almost like when I was reading the What Women Know, the whole article, and I was like, I understood their points, and I think that, and at the very beginning of it, I was like, yeah, I'd say I agree with those things that you're saying it, but again, towards the end with the stripling warrior thing, I was like, I don't think that's what they meant. Obviously, they were teaching them to have faith, like you said, but I was thinking that there was a huge tone of like condescension. Like when I was reading it, I was just like, I feel like you're looking down on Sister Beck like she's not smart or something like that. Like you're like almost like someone being like, no, child. Like, I don't think so. I don't know. Did you guys get that feeling? Because that's kind of how I felt reading it.
Yeah, I did. I sided more with the mothers who know because, well, it's in accordance with the revelations given to the prophet. Sister Beck is the Relief Society president, and she's called and inspired to give, direction and counsel to women of the church. And her talk was based on revelation from prophets. So, if you follow the prophet, you follow the prophet. You can't say, oh, I do, except for. Let's see. The proclamation to the family was basically what hers was off of, and it was given to us as a guide and a counsel for direction in our lives and our families in accordance with the eternal plan of salvation. And then the women who authored What Women Know really don't know. They either know the prophet's a prophet or they don't. There's no gray area. You can't say, well, I believe what President Hinckley said except for this area. So, except for he missed the mark on like women's role as nurturers, that men are as equally nurturing as women. I mean, you can't have it both ways. That he's either prophet or he's not. You either believe it or you don't.
I think that. Go ahead, Amy.
I felt like the women, the What Women Know, focused more on the individual than the family. And I think that was the defining difference between the mothers who know and What Women Know. Because the mothers who know took a very Christ-like approach. The What Women Know had some good things in there, but I felt like it was more of an individualistic document.
Kind of going along with what Alita said about the nurturing thing, I actually, like, when I first read that first sentence, like, fathers as well as mothers, men as well and women are called to nurture. And I would agree with that. I don't think anyone would say, like, men should never nurture at all. They have no business there. Of course no one would say that because that's pretty ridiculous. But so I think that in that sense, it's like, okay, I don't think Sister Beck was saying women can only be nurturers. I don't think that's what she was saying, but I think that they took it that way. But I mean, that first little section there about nurturing, I was like, okay, I would agree with that, but I also think that Sister Beck would agree with that too. You know?
I
And
agree
so
that the nurturing part is one of women's strongest roles. It's not saying it's our only role, but it's one of our strongest roles. It's what we're born. It's what we're born with.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What did you think the tone and focus of What Women Know article? What did you think of the tone and focus? And did you see any philosophies of men mingled with doctrine? If so, where?
I kind of already said that I felt like when I was reading it, I felt kind of a tone of condescension a little, where it was just kind of taking what she said and being like, "You're wrong. This is what actually needs to be happening." But I think that there was a lot of, ideals of the world mixed in there, and particularly about when it comes to employment, most women prefer the luxury of choice over the limitations of necessity. But in Sister Beck's talk, she talked about how mothers who know need less or use less, like, so they give up things for their family. And she's not saying that mothers should just live on the bare necessities and drink, milk and, and that's it, or water and bread. I mean, that's not what she's saying. But then they were talking about how that women should be able to work without people looking down on them. And no one really does look down on women who work, but they advocate for women who decide to work.
I totally agree. I think that, can you guys hear me still?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that this is what it says. It says, when it comes to employment, most women prefer the luxury of choice to the limitations of necessity. What do you guys think that means?
Well, I think it means that they would I kind of just talked about it a little bit when I talked about Sister Beck's talk. She talked about how mothers who know use less, like they don't, take in excess, like they sacrifice things for their children and family and whatnot, and that's what she was mostly getting at. But
So she's saying when it comes to employment, most women prefer luxury to simply getting by in life. Is that what you all got out of that?
that's pretty
as
much
far as
right.
financial?
Right.
Okay, because
More
the question is, do you think there's a tone of the focus, do you see any of the philosophies of men mingled with the doctrine? Well, I think that mothers who know, get that even if they've got a smaller paycheck, that their children, having somebody with them at the crossroads, all the time during the day, watching over them, caring for them, that they get that, and they don't long for the luxuries of choice, because the Spirit is telling them that they need to be there with their families and with their children. I think that was a philosophy of men that can creep in through saying just the blanket statement that all women prefer the luxury of choice. Now, a lot of women don't have the choice, but if you do have the choice, then I think that was definitely a philosophy of men.
I think another philosophy of men is in the next section after that, where it talks about men, and they said that they struggle within a system that equates leadership with hierarchy and domination. And I just don't think that's true. And then she said, anyone who is reminded equally that she is equally important is probably not. And I think that is just 100% untrue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do too.
Oh. Yeah, I see another one. I know I just said one, but I'll say another one. Effective parenting is a learned behavior, and as parents we learn to grow with each child. And it says, children come with their own gifts, challenges, and freedom of choice. We reject teachings that encourage women to shoulder the ultimate responsibility for every child of child rearing and family life, and take on shame and guilt when things do not go according to plan. So I think that they're assuming Sister Beck wants them to take on shame and guilt. I'm guessing they probably have taken on shame and guilt themselves, or that's kind of out of left field. But the part that catches my eye the most is we reject the teachings that women should shoulder ultimate responsibility for every aspect of child raising. And I think the part that mingles there is that, yes, women should shoulder that because the men should shoulder ultimately the responsibility for providing. And somebody has to ultimately have the buck stop with them. Somebody has to say, I'm responsible for this, and I'm responsible for making sure that my kid, gets fed every 2 hours, or making sure that my kid does this or that. Because if you're not, and you're waiting on somebody else to do it, and you're the one at home, somebody has to be responsible for the children. And not that it's a demeaning calling, because I think, in my personal opinion, it's much higher than the male role. But anyway.
I wonder if it's kind of talking about how, like, when things do not go according to plan, all mothers, particularly mothers in the church, they want their kids to grow up in the church. They want them to get married in the temple and serve Christians, And I wonder if I'm sure there are some mothers out there who do think that they're like, oh my goodness, like my son didn't serve a mission. That is so my fault. Or my children are inactive now. That is so my fault. But I don't think Sister Beck would agree with that, and I would agree with that, because and here's the thing, I don't think that there are any teachings in the church that would encourage women to take on the guilt for their adult children's decisions. I don't think anybody would be like, oh, your 25-year-old son isn't active anymore? Gee, that's got to be your fault. What did you do as a parent? At that point, making their own choices, and there are no teachings in the gospel that would say, if your child turns out to be, a hoodlum, that's your fault, because there's none.
There's none. In fact, there's the opposite teachings that say, even just in this past general conference, that say, hey, this isn't your fault, and you can't take this to heart, and everybody has their own choices. But what I found was so interesting was that they put that there, because just like you said, Sister Beck never even said that or implied that.
Mm-hmm. I put, to me the tone was kind of like women were to me the tone was like the women were taking direct, inspired revelation and adapting it to what they wanted it to say. They were saying that Julie Beck is a nice lady, but she doesn't really understand women of today, and that philosophies of men were evident through most of the writing, I felt like, and in direct conflict with the proclamation. It says, fathers as well as mothers, we said that about the nurturing part, and then mother and sisterhood can't be reduced to performance of narrowly prescribed tasks, but emerge from who we know ourselves to be. So, it's in direct conflict with what the proclamation says. And then it says, women and girls still perform the bulk of low-paying jobs and unpaid labor, including housework. So I guess you're supposed to be paid for housework. Often at the expense of their own education, leadership, creativity, health, and well-being. My mom, who is 80 years old, is very active and always has been in advocating for women's rights and mothers' rights. She used to write the newspaper all the time when we were growing up and tell them, because okay, I'm going to age myself, but y'all already know I'm old. So they, when it was the women's lib movement was really coming out and coming strong, and so there would be articles in the paper like every week about, how women are being held back and not, reaching their full potential, kind of like this says. And my mom would write in every week and say why that wasn't true. And, she still is very active in her community and, writing people on the city council and everything else. And It also says, by valuing ourselves as lifelong achievers, we take joy in the collective contribution we make to the fields of government, medicine, academia, journalism, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know, nobody says, you, even as a homemaker, that you can't make a difference and make strides in those areas. I mean, you know, we've seen on the United Families website how a lot of those women are mothers and have families and kids, and they advocate very well in that, you know, in that role in their community and throughout the world for strengthening families.
I found in the very last paragraph it says, our roles as mothers, sisters, daughters, parents, and friends are just a few of the many parts we will play in the course of our lives. We may influence hundreds, perhaps thousands of lives, but we are not our roles. Sister Beck wasn't trying to say, you're a mother, that's the only thing you can ever do in your life. She was saying it's one of the most important roles and one of the most needed roles that we have in our society today. She wasn't saying, oh, that's the only thing you are ever allowed to do. You're only allowed to ever be a mother. You're only allowed to ever be a daughter. No, it goes beyond that. It's much more important.
I think one thing that just kind of stood out to me was the in Sister Beck's talk, she talked about how the lady who got dressed up for Sundays and walked, you know, really far on the dirt road and always had her sons had iron shirts and, you know, white for Sunday and stuff. And so then, you know, I'm guessing this is where they derived the paragraph about cleanliness from. And so they're like, we don't want to put a burden on outward appearances of our sisters and all that stuff. And I was like, that's not what she was getting at. She was just saying that they understood that they were going to renew covenants and that they were going to it's the Sabbath day and they were going to sit in the chapel to, you know, commune with God. And it's like they just knew that it was important, and that was the point she was making. It wasn't that we need to stop going to church and looking scummy, particularly, you know, third world and stuff like that. I mean, obviously, and she was just putting an example to having respect for sacrament meeting and going to church on Sunday, and I feel like they take the things that she says, and instead of looking at it from what she's actually saying, and they think that she's over here being like, women need to dress up and they need to look pretty, and if they don't, they shouldn't even go. And that's not what she's saying. But that's like what out of it. And I feel like that happened all throughout their thing. Like she would say things, and then all of a sudden it would be something else.
Okay.
And then anything else.
I noticed one other thing too. I noticed that in this, what women, first of all, Sister Beck's talking about mothers, and so she's not talking about women, especially not women who are single, women who can't have children. She's not even she's talking about mothers who already have the responsibility of raising souls. But I feel like the basic tone of what women know is an entitlement. So it says unpaid labor, including housework. So they're saying that, hey, you know, we don't have to do housework. We don't have to be unpaid for our labor. It's not, you know, I don't know why anybody would think that we would need to do that. And they're saying that they're entitled to things like, what was the other one I found? To be lifelong achievers. They're entitled. I feel like they feel like they're entitled to working a job, not working a job, but achieving some grand something worldly, and that's an entitlement. And that it's entitlement to do that and be a mother, and that they can do both. And, you know, I just felt like in the beginning, we just all had to work because we all had to survive, and now we don't have to work to survive. We don't have to do that. However, it is like the number one thing to bond people together, to do basic housework, and to bring us back to our families, because we all have to come back and do those things. But I feel like that was one of the basic underlying negative undertones, was just these basic ideas that say, hey, you don't have to clean up after yourself. You know?
Yeah, I think, Satan obviously is hard at work, so they're taking what was intended and the meaning of it and twisting it to conform to what they wanted it to say, or what they wanted her to say that she said, which none of that was what she said. They twisted it to say, oh, well, see, they're saying you have to have your kids, spit spot clean every time you take them to sacrament, even if you live in the jungles of Africa or wherever. And that's, like we said, not what she said. But they're twisting it so that they can make her, I guess, look bad, or make it turn into something that it never was intended to be. Okay, so the next question is, if there was a document entitled What God Knows About Women and Mothers, which of the two articles you read would that most closely resemble? I think we all know the answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Mothers who know. What do you know a woman's role to be in Heavenly Father's plan?
Well, I'm a wife, but I'm not a mother yet. But the role of a woman, and not just like mothers, is because all women can be nurturers, even to people who aren't their own children. And it's not a child necessarily that needs to be nurtured. Of course, like when you're a mother, of course you'd be nurturing your children because that's, your number one. But as a person who is not a mother, it's just interesting for me to think about, one day when I do have kids and stuff like that. But I think a lot about, how can I best prepare myself to become the nurturing person that, is important for my family. And, I just think that a woman's role in general in the church is to be a nurturer to the people around her and, be an uplifter. Because I think that makes a huge difference.
I totally agree. I think that we can learn some important things from our role in Heavenly Father's plan. And I think one of the things we can learn is from what we're called. We're called daughters, and we're God's crowning creation. So I think from those two things, we know that whatever work we're called to bear in this world, keeping those two things in mind, that we're daughters of our Heavenly King, and we're His crowning creation, that the rest doesn't really matter, because it just is divine.
Yeah, and I put, because it says, what do you think your role in Heavenly Father's plan is? I think, as we've talked about before, we do have an eternal purpose and an identity and a divine nature, and so we're, as members of the church, of course, we're held to higher standards or understanding of what our role is in Heavenly Father's plan. But our role is basically mirrored what is in the proclamation. It's to be nurturers, and like Lindsay said, even though we are maybe mothers or may never be mothers throughout our lifetime, we're still charged with nurturing those around us and nurturing other children, whether nieces, nephews, primary kids. I've had people that have nurtured my kids throughout their lives, and they're in their 30s or close to be, and so it's not just I can only do this in my role as a family or as a mother.
I agree. It says from the role of women assignment, it says the enemy of all righteousness knew the strength of women from the beginning, and throughout the course of history of this earth has launched a relentless attack against women, their roles, their sanctity, their gifts, and their identity and their purpose. I think that's true, like what we've been talking about with abortion and unwed mothers and all of that, that if one mother's even affected, it usually goes down and trickles down to her children and their children and their children. So if one woman, say, has a child out of wedlock, most likely her children or her girls are going to have children out of wedlock, because that's the example that they've been shown. So if mothers embrace their role as women and nurturers and keep themselves morally clean, then it will spread to their children. And
yeah, it's less likely to happen that you'll have issues like that in your family or in your kids.
True.
Says, how might a man's understanding and conviction of a woman's role dramatically impact the eternal well-being of children, family, and women?
Okay, I looked ahead to this question, and I have to laugh because I was thinking about Johnny Lingo. Has anybody ever seen Johnny Lingo?
Yes.
Okay, well, I think that sums it up, really. I mean, if you've ever seen that video. Have you seen it, Allison or Lindsay? Lindsay, you haven't seen it? Oh, my gosh. Go rent it from your church library. Oh, my goodness. So, anyway, I think that, first of all, you go to Elaine Dalton's talk, Elaine S. Dalton, which says, what can you do for your daughter? Love her mother. And, you have to have a transitional character if you're going to have somebody really botch things up. So it just takes one person to botch up a whole family, but it takes one person to make it better. But if you botch up a whole family and only one person is a transitional character and doesn't follow after their dad's patterns, you got problems. You got a whole family going hayward. But I think that fathers, because mothers are nurturers, they need someone to nurture them. Having two kids, and I have an 8-week-old baby, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I just give and give and give. I have no sleep, and it's just like, please, strengthen me for I can't stretch this far. I can't, get up every 2 hours with my newborn, and then another hour later with my 3 or 4-year-old. Because he's scared or whatever, because my husband's got to go to work or whatever. But I think that the husband has to help nurture the mother. And so if he doesn't understand and have a conviction of the woman's role, first of all, he's not going to support the woman to fulfill her identity of if possible, being a stay-at-home mom. He's going to want help in his role. And he's not going to support her in very many other things and may not even respect her in a lot of ways. And those things can lead to eternal ruin for a family, at the very least.
I like what you said about him not respecting her if he doesn't, understand the role of a woman and the role of a mother and have a conviction being like, this is real, like, if my wife knows that this is important, but I also know that this is important, and that type of harmony in a marriage, especially with children, it will definitely increase the well-being of children, families, and women, because then women feel supported in the role of being a mother and staying at home, and children will feel nurtured, and they'll have a general well-being because they'll know that their father loves their mother, like you said about Elaine S. Dalton, and that's one of my favorite talks of all time. And I overall, if a man has the same type of conviction of I know that this is your calling, I know that this is important, and it's important to me too, because I know how important it is for our family, then that's just, it just kind of ties it up in a pretty bow and makes it really a lot better than if it was only me being like, I know I need to do this. And my husband is like, why can't you just go to work and make us money? Because then you're right, there really wouldn't be any respect, because he would think you're just at home, eating bonbons all day doing nothing. But when you have a husband who knows why it's important and what you're doing, then it really, that's just where it becomes the next level of well-being for children, families, and women.
Yeah, and I think when you get into the nitty-gritty of like child raising and how much work it is, if you don't have a husband that knows, you're hosed. You're totally hosed, because you have to have him support you physically, mentally, and emotionally, and that's the basis of the work. But yeah, they're not going to want to do that. What reason is there for a man to go support a family, to even start a family? I mean, so many men don't even want to start families because they're afraid of their role, because they don't understand the divinity even of a woman's role. And so, not only, what about this? The family doesn't even become in existence because it's easier for the man just to provide for himself.
Yeah, I know a ton of people that my husband works with right now who are like, whoa, you're married? And they look at him like he's like, some like awesome person, and he's like, yeah, and they're like, I'm never going to get married till I'm like 40 or something, because they're, living life, living large, and doing whatever they want. So they're like, I'm never getting married, or I'm not getting married until I'm like 40 or something. And so he came home and told me that, and he was just like, I don't know like how people can live their lives that way, but
Yeah, I think just the whole women's roles and men's roles and all that, when in the 70s, when, like I said, the ERA was coming out, and it was a big deal, and they sold it that you can have a career and you don't have to be stuck in the house, but if you want to, you can you can be a stay-at-home mother, and you don't you can work if you want or don't work if you want. It's your choice, and that's how it was sold. But if you look at when inflation happened, it was right about the same time. So you had retailers and different industries out there saying, well, now everybody can afford to pay more for a car because they have two incomes coming into the family, or they can pay more for a home, or if you look at the pattern, that's when inflation really started to rise, was about that time when the Equal Rights Amendment was being pushed through, because they just assumed everybody had a two-parent home. I mean, two incomes in every home. And I think it's, it was really a disservice, because in the long run, most people can't afford to do both now because everything's so much more. So a lot of people have to work outside the home, or a lot of people do, so that they can, live. There's a lot of people that, I told my father-in-law, and I kind of got in this discussion because he's very much supports that idea of women working outside the home, and that left-leaning ideal. And I told him, I said, I would have loved to stay home with my kids. My daughter-in-law would love to stay home with her kids. We just, I couldn't afford it at the time, and she can't afford it now. Luckily, I had family close by, so my kids were always with my sister or my mom. They didn't go to like a sitter or daycare or anything like that, so that was a blessing. But a lot of people just can't do it. They can't make it on just one income anymore, and I think it's directly related to that.
And that's so true, because that's kind of in the What Women Know thing, and they tried to make it seem like, I don't remember where it talks about it, but I know it does, about how almost like that Sister Beck was trying to make them feel bad if they worked outside the home, which of course she's not. People have to work, just like you were saying. I mean, things are so expensive, and particularly if you want, like, I mean, cars and houses and things like that, you're right. People assume you have two incomes, and that's just it. But, I mean, But in the What Women Know, they kind of made it seem like Sister Beck was trying to make anybody who worked outside the home was doing their family a disservice or not doing what they were supposed to be doing.
Yeah. And with that, you know, working outside the home is very, 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 very honorable if you're making ends meet, because it's so much better to provide for yourself than to have to go have somebody else provide for you, you know, on assistance or whatever. So it's you know, I mean, there's that you know, it just, this life, it used to be that everybody in the family went and helped the dad work out in the farm, and everybody in the farm came in and helped mom if she needed it in the house, and that was their living, and it was intermingled, and the reason it worked so well is because the children got to learn everything from the families and from the parents. They got to see modeling, they got to see the roles, they got to be with them 24/7 and gain relationships. However, right now we still have to do that. We still have to learn how to, you know, sometimes we have to help the husband with his role, and sometimes the husband has to help us with our role. You know, we're in a mortal world, but that husband, you know, it's a nice thing when they understand and both parents have the conviction of a woman's role, because then that can be, you can both help each other out and know that it's the right thing and you're doing a good job.
And I think most kids, if you asked them, would rather have their mom at home, you know, when they got home from school, or to get them off, you know, to school, or, you know, being there when they're little and not in school yet, than, you know, having to go get off the bus at a daycare, or, you know, having other people watch them all the time, instead of, really, they just want to be home with their moms.
Yeah, but at the same time, they'll know, you know, that it was a good thing if they were. Everybody works together for the good of the family.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Tells.
I'm just saying, like in their case, where it's more of a luxury, or it's more that they want to work outside the home, they feel more fulfilled, or they can buy more things, or you know, they see that other things take a priority over them as children.
Yeah, and I think that a man can help a woman to understand her priority. I think that just like we have a big influence on men, I think that men can have a big influence on the woman and say, hey, you know, I know that that's going to bias us much more, but I understand your role is really important. So this is why I don't want you to do that, and I'm going to support you in not doing that. Or whatever.
Anybody want to add anything to that, or should we go to the very last question? The last question says, the Savior said that in the last days even the very elect shall be deceived. How can we avoid being deceived by the philosophies of men and philosophies of men and women's roles? I gave the easy answer, follow the prophet.
Yeah. Well, I think it's pretty obvious that that there's a lot of deception now. Even in the church, I mean, that's what women know. All these women and men that signed it at the bottom, I was like, good grief, all you people. But but they talk like at their very opening thing before they go into the What Women Know. At the very beginning, they're like, oh, you know, we've all served in the church and we're faithful members and all these, you know, and whatnot, but they're being deceived, or they're looking at it in a way that's just a little bit skewed that adopts the philosophies of men. And so I think that really what Alita said about following the prophet is just like, that's just it. I mean, the prophet is here to guide us in these latter days, and that's what he's here for. And if we're listening to the prophets and if we're listening to our leaders, I mean, Sister Beck was called of God. I mean, she's not just some lady up there, you know, spouting her opinion. This this is what she was inspired to tell people. So, I mean, it's just that we need to listen to what they're saying and pray about it, and not just get our own ideas and go off about it. Like, I feel like these What Women Know people, that they think that their ideas are good, but because they sound good, but they're not really looking at the consequences of their ideas. And so I think that we can avoid being deceived by just praying about what we're hearing. I mean, a lot of people obviously had a problem taking Sister Beck's talk at face value, but they really should have prayed about it and not just been, we need to do all these things and just write their own thing.
I agree with that. I equate this to Kate Kelly and the women who want the priesthood. This topic frustrates me. But anyways, they are letting themselves get influenced by the ways of the world, and they're trying to bring that into the church. The church sets down these doctrines and principles, and they never sway. They don't say, oh, we're going to do this, and then they flip-flop, flip-flop, flip-flop. They say it, and then we do it. They don't go back and forth. And these women are trying to bring in the priesthood to the church, saying that women are being oppressed and all this kind of stuff, and they're saying that their church doesn't value women's roles and doesn't appreciate women and appreciate what they do for families and all this kind of stuff. And it just drives me crazy because they're letting the outside influences of the world come into the church, and I don't think that's right. So that's my opinion. I would just say, don't let the outside influence of the world influence of what you know. Find out for yourself what you believe is true. If you believe that the church is true, great, wonderful. If you don't, then leave. So that's what I have to say.
I agree with that. It's like, it's not, you don't get a vote. This is what the Lord has set out and set down. And if you believe it, then you believe it. If you don't, then it might be time for you to find another religion or start one of your own. But this isn't it. We don't, you don't get to say, oh, well, I don't think we should wear dresses at church anymore. I'm going to wear pants every Sunday just because they're more comfortable. That's not what although that's not a church doctrine per se, that's just not what we do. It's not like Allison said, we can decide this Sunday, you know what, I should have the priesthood, and so I'm going to go to the prophet and ask him to ask again because he must be wrong. It's you don't get to choose. This is the way that it's been given to the prophets, and you either believe him or you either know that he's a prophet of God or you don't.
Yeah, these principles that we've had in our church have been around since before Joseph Smith times. Like, they've been there. We haven't changed our views. We've added things, but we've never gone back on what we've said, what we stand for. And a woman's role is very valuable in the church, and Jesus Christ knew that, so that's why and it even said in this document over here, where is it? I can't find it. That, like, we were made second, and we were made the most beautiful. I can't remember. It's in one of those assignments that we had to do. But we were made after Adam, and Jesus made us women last, or Eve last, because she was most beautiful and sacred and divine and all those good things.
I have two stories that apply really, really well here. Two quick stories. So the Savior's very elect, will be deceived. Well, the first one is, and how do we avoid being deceived by the philosopher's men? The first one is, in my last word, I had this gal who was married to a seminary teacher. They had 8 kids. She was young women's president, and he was in the bishopric. And all of a sudden, at age 45, she just got up, left her kids, left her husband, and decided she was done with the church. I mean, just like that. And she had been just the most faithful. I mean, at least from what you could see on the outside, like everyone in the whole ward just went, what? And you think, well, okay, how did she get deceived? And I think that there's a lot of different ways that people can be deceived. I have a theory about her. I mean, I can't understand why her attitudes changed so quickly. And my theory is maybe it was some kind of enormous hormone change. I don't know, where she was just having a nervous breakdown or something. And I think that deception can come in all kinds of different ways. And I think that what we have to do in that aspect to avoid being deceived by the world's philosophies is to simply, like Allison said, know what you know, write it down, remember how you knew and your testimony, and then sign it off. No matter what happens, you have a nervous breakdown and you're feeling like the church isn't true, you're going to leave your family, you go get help. You go get medication, because if there's one thing you know, it's that the church is true and you're not leaving your family, and that the Lord will help you work through anything. And that if you're having any other thoughts, there's something wrong, you know? So you go in and you take care of it however you have to, from counselors, psychiatrists, whatever you have to do, you go in and you see what may be physically wrong. I mean, you explore every avenue, because your eternal salvation isn't worth a nervous, you know, not just maybe something that could have been fixed because your brain's not functioning. And of course, I'm sure Heavenly Father is very merciful for that. However, the other thing I was going to say, and I think I've mentioned this, it just applies so well here, in one of our discussions before, and that is that my work asked us to go to a training. Allison, did I talk about this in our last meeting, in our last group? So our work asked...
I think you put it on a board, on one of the discussion boards. It
was the strangest thing. So, long story short, they were their own religion, and they were having you make vows that there was no right or wrong, and people were confessing terrible child sins in this group. And so, but what I'm getting at, we went and called the police and everything, and the police said, oh, they're a registered religion, they don't have to report that. And so...
Wait, do y'all know what she's talking about? I don't know if we were in a different group, Amy. I think we might have been in a different group.
Okay, so I got asked to go to this group.
I remember this story.
Okay, so I got asked to go to this group meeting, or to this work meeting, work conference, to like leadership conference, whatever, and it ended up being a religion. Well, to make a long story short, my boss's wife was in the Relief Society presidency, and she really liked this, and she's the one that got the whole company to go. And what it is it's a brainwashing technique to get you to join their philosophies of men. And there's many of them. I won't go into any details. But what happened was, my boss said, well, you know, we were having marriage problems, and now they're all fixed because of this program. And she was totally deceived. And less than a year later, she had an affair, and they were divorced. And she's a very elect lady. I mean, you know, I by any definition, if I know of. And it's like, how was she deceived? Well, it started with literally being in a place, in a situation that literally was using brainwashing techniques. In fact, Allison, I responded to one of your posts. Did you read it today about brainwashing? Did you read it yet?
Not yet.
Or not Allison, I'm sorry, Lindsay. Anyway, the definition of brainwashing is where they make you go hungry, they make you... I think that it relates a lot to TV, so if anybody wants to read my post on Lindsay's thing, I think TV is definitely, and society is definitely brainwashing us, but that's what they did here, and she was deceived. But yet the church has a protection out that says, don't go to any meetings where they keep you hungry, where they keep you up late, where they use kindness, coercion tactics. And anyway, I think, so the question is, can people be deceived? Yeah. How do we avoid it? Well, you make up your mind, and then you don't let your emotions take over. You just stick to it, no matter if it's a breakdown, no matter if it's a brainwashing. You just don't do it. There's lines that you don't cross, and that's one of them. And when you walk out of it at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how you're feeling or what you think or what you've been persuaded into. There's a line, and it's not crossed because it's the truth. And you have to remember that and make that decision before it comes.
All right, so I guess that concludes it. So, Amy, if you want to do a wrap-up or kind of summarize it so that Can you summarize all that? Everything we talked about?
Yeah, yeah, I can. So, we all agreed that we sided with Sister Bex because she had the Spirit with her, and we felt like the other one was just kind of a mockery of Sister Bex and didn't really pick what she had intended. The focus of what women know, we felt like was a negative focus, and we saw that the philosophies of men were definitely mingled in with doctrines, and we pointed that out with specifics. If there was a document titled Two Articles, okay. So we decided that obviously mothers who know most closely resembles what God knows about women and mothers, and we decided that the women's role in our Heavenly Father's plan is to be a mother and is divine, and that it coincides with Sister Beck's talk. We decided that a man's understanding and conviction of a woman is very essential to a woman's functioning and being able to fulfill her role to the best physically possible on this earth, and having the ability to even just have self-esteem and to be supported as being a mother or a stay-at-home mother. And the Savior, and then the last one is does the very like to be deceived? And we all talked about how you just have to be a straight arrow, and if you don't believe, and Allison talked about how if you don't believe, you just need to leave. But as far as not being deceived, you just have to remember the truth and not be pulled in by anything else.